What happens when someone who actually understands the technical side of singing hears SB19 for the first time?
I like that slide. I really like that. Ah!
Not just a casual listener, not a fan, not someone reacting because the song is trending, but a Japanese vocal coach, someone trained to listen for things most people would never notice. And apparently, when this vocal coach heard SB19's GENTO,
I want some, I get some, no later. I woke up and baked dead potato.
the reaction was strong enough to make people stop and pay attention. Because sometimes the most interesting reactions to SB19 don't come from the loudest fans. They come from people who know exactly what they're listening for. And that is what makes this moment so interesting. Because GENTO is not exactly a song designed to sit quietly in the background. From the opening moments, SB19 brings attitude, rhythm, choreography, vocal switches, and a level of performance intensity that demands attention. But there is another layer to the song, and that is the vocal work happening underneath all that energy. When you are simply watching SB19 perform, it is easy to focus on the choreography. You see 5 performers moving together. You hear the beat. You catch the memorable parts of the chorus. You see the crowd reacting. And before you know it, GENTO has turned into an experience. But a vocal coach approaches it differently. They are listening. Where is the breath? How is the voice being supported? How are the members switching between different vocal textures? How do they maintain control while performing physically demanding choreography? And perhaps most importantly, how much of what you're hearing is actually difficult to reproduce live? That is where this Japanese reaction becomes fascinating. Because SB19 has spent years developing something that can easily be overlooked when people only judge them from the surface. They aren't simply trying to sound good in a studio recording. Their entire identity has been built around performance. And GENTO is one of the clearest examples of that. The song requires confidence. It requires rhythm. It requires precise delivery. And it requires the members to maintain their individual identities while still sounding like one group. That is not easy, especially when choreography enters the equation. Think about what happens during a live performance. A vocalist isn't standing completely still inside a recording booth. They're moving, they're dancing, they're interacting with thousands of people. They're dealing with the acoustics of a venue. They're managing breathing. And they're still expected to deliver the song. That is why reactions from vocal professionals can be particularly revealing. Because a trained listener doesn't necessarily get distracted by the spectacle. They can separate the performance into its individual components. They can hear what is happening. And when that person reacts to SB19, it gives viewers another reason to reconsider what they thought they knew about the group. This is especially important because SB19 has often had to fight against a familiar misconception. For years, P-pop has sometimes been treated internationally as though it is simply following something that already exists somewhere else. But SB19's journey tells a different story. They didn't become recognizable simply because they were placed inside a particular genre. They developed a sound, performance identity, and fan culture that allowed them to stand on their own. And GENTO became one of those songs that helped communicate that identity internationally. The song has an attitude that doesn't require translation. Even if someone doesn't understand every word, they can feel what the performance is trying to communicate. That confidence, that swagger, that energy. And this is where Japan becomes particularly interesting. Japan has one of the world's most sophisticated music and entertainment markets. Japanese audiences have decades of exposure to highly trained singers, performers, idol groups, rock artists, dancers, and vocalists. So when SB19 steps into that environment, the challenge isn't simply getting people to hear them. The challenge is getting them to pay attention. And that is exactly why a reaction like this matters. Because every time someone outside the traditional SB19 audience discovers the group and responds positively, it represents another tiny crack in the wall separating P-pop from the wider global music conversation. One reaction alone doesn't mean SB19 has conquered Japan. It doesn't mean every Japanese listener suddenly knows the group. And it certainly doesn't mean we should exaggerate the moment into something it isn't. But that's precisely why this moment is worth discussing. Because international growth rarely happens in one giant explosion. It happens through moments. One person discovers the music. Another person shares it. Someone else becomes curious. A professional hears the vocals. A performer sees the choreography. A festival audience experiences the group live. And slowly, the conversation changes. That is how international recognition grows. And SB19 has been creating those moments repeatedly. Now go back to the Japanese vocal coach hearing Gento. There is something almost symbolic about it. A song created by Filipino artists reaches someone on the other side of Asia. That person listens through the lens of their own expertise. And suddenly, the conversation is no longer just about whether the song is catchy. It becomes, what exactly are these performers doing? That is a much more interesting question. Because once people start asking that question, they are no longer simply scrolling past SB19. They are investigating. And investigation leads to discovery. You start with Gento. Then you discover another song. Then another performance. Then perhaps you find Mappa. You hear the emotional side. Then damn, you discover another dimension. Then you watch a live performance. And suddenly, the group that initially looked like 5 performers, making noise on stage starts revealing an entire catalog of different strengths. That is one of SB19's biggest advantages. There isn't only one version of the group. There is the powerful performance side. There is the vocal side. There is the songwriting side. There is the emotional side. And there is the live performance side. Gento simply happens to be one of the songs that puts the performance identity front and center. And perhaps that is why a vocal coach reacting to it is so satisfying to watch. It reminds fans that sometimes the things they have become accustomed to seeing are actually impressive. ATIN have watched SB19 perform so many times that certain abilities can start feeling normal. The harmonies feel normal. The vocal exchanges feel normal. The energy feels normal. The synchronization feels normal. But to someone encountering it for the first time, can be completely different. And that first reaction can remind longtime fans of something they already knew. SB19 has become good enough that their strengths can be easy to take for granted. And now, as SB19 continues appearing in international spaces, those strengths are being exposed to entirely new audiences. Japan isn't simply another destination on a tour schedule. It is another test, another audience, another music culture, another group of professionals and listeners capable of evaluating what they see and hear. And every time SB19 gets through that door, the conversation becomes a little bigger. So perhaps the most important part of this Japanese vocal coach's reaction isn't even the reaction itself. It's what the reaction represents. It represents discovery. It represents curiosity. And it represents the possibility that someone who had never paid serious attention to Filipino P-pop can suddenly hear one song and think, wait, who are these guys? And that question is powerful, because that is how every new fan begins. Not with knowing everything, not with understanding the entire history,